Politics are essentially insane. And I'm not talking about the current administration or the last administration or anything like that. I'm more referencing the way that people come to and deal with politics. So, I've often said that there are only ever three pieces of news. That a politician is corrupt, there has been a scandal, and your taxes are going up. Those are the three pieces of news. The only three pieces of news. If you can find me a piece of news that doesn't fit one of those three categories, if not more, then I will be quite shocked. Because it's not typically profitable for news companies to report anything else. The sensationalism is a high draw for readership, therefore, or viewership. Therefore, they go for the most sensational. The most sensational thing. There's been a scandal. Well, what causes a scandal? Well, a corrupt politician can, although there are other sources of scandal. Sometimes that means your taxes are going to go up. So when people run around like it's the end of the world every time one of those three things happens, I find myself scratching my head going, I kind of knew this was going to happen. Why does everybody else act like it's a big shock? Once you figure out that those three things are the only news ever, you sort of get bored with the news because you see the pattern and you see it repeat, and it gets, frankly, unbearably boring. There is little to recommend reading the news to anybody of good character. I think might have been Ben Franklin who said, if you don't read the news, you are uninformed, and if you do read the news, you are misinformed. And I think that's largely a true statement. And getting beyond simply the malfeasance of the news, which is a long and storied history all of its own, the way we engage with it and the way we engage with politics is fundamentally, I think, cancerous. And it's cancerous because of those three news articles that always crop up. So, no matter what president is in office, this one, the last one, the next one, the one 3 terms ago, who knows, who cares? It's kind of all the same to me. People like to support one politician, and they're all for him. And, yeah, this is great. This is what we want. And then the next guy comes along and, tear him down. Not my president. All that stuff, right? And it feels, there's some visceral part of it that kind of feels good. You're sticking it to the man kind of stuff. Well, that's cancerous. Because, in my opinion at least, every single politician ever exists on exactly the same level, which is a few rungs below prostitutes. In my view, the person most qualified to hold political office is a person who would never in a million years seek to hold political office. So, simply by the fact that every politician in a Democratic or Republican system has to run for office, that initial fact is enough to disqualify them, in my view, from holding office. I don't think it's possible to want to acquire power to yourself and still remain entirely principled. And when people are shocked that this turns out to be true, I find myself somewhat amused, because it's sort of like watching a dog get excited for the same brand of dog food that it's had for the last 10 years. It's like, there's nothing new here, get over it. So, yeah, the current president is probably corrupt. I know that. The last president was corrupt. The president before him was corrupt. The president before him was corrupt. And so on and so forth. Almost all the way back to the founding. I say almost because at the founding there was a distinction of kind, I think, between what our modern politics ended up as and what they were then, because they were sculpting a nation out of essentially nothing. So there was a necessity for some version of integrity, and you see that in the documents that they set up to help run this country. But another thing about politics that I find cancerous is the fact that we've ended up in essentially a two-party system, where you have, essentially you have the Democrats and Republicans in America, and they represent the two extremes of the aisle. And then you have a bunch of other parties, but they are never ever going to win anything, not in a million years. So you essentially have just the two parties. And when you have just the two parties, it's somewhat hard for politicians of either party to break away and do something with integrity, because they have to toe the party line at all times. And so I think it was Elizabeth Warren who said that in a certain district of New York, a cup of water with the letter D on it would win. And I'm pretty sure that there are districts some elsewhere in the U.S. where a cup of water with the letter R on it would win, and both of those are equally stupid, or rather show up equally the stupidity of humanity and our partisan politics. Now, I am probably a partisan myself in my own way. It's sort of hard to avoid it without dispensing with one's humanity, which is a very difficult task. So I have my preferred candidates and my own opinions, but they are far beside the point here. And that, for my money, there should be an abolishment of political parties, because they've turned into little, if not nothing more than legalized crime syndicates. And you see this happen over and over and over again, and people get shocked by it. And they'll say, "How can you say that about my candidate?" It's like, well, he's not your candidate. He's his own person, and he's corrupt. Oh, pearl clutching, how dare you, sir? Well, because I'm looking at the world with both eyes open. Because I don't have a rosy view of humanity colored by the postmodernist view of the world, that everything, that there is no essential nature to mankind. I come from the Christian tradition, which says that mankind is fallen, and I subscribe to the Augustinian view of the privation theory of evil, which means that, which I think is the single most provable thing in the universe, which is that human beings lack an essential quality of good. And this is easy to see, because a 10-year-old child won't steal a candy bar. 5-year-old definitely will. you have to teach children not to lie, not to steal, not to cheat. They lie, steal, and cheat quite naturally from birth. And I know this because I was one of the kids who did that. It's like you'd see something, it's like, I want it, and then you do whatever you thought it took to get it. It's like, people are not essentially good from birth. We need to be taught goodness. And then once we're taught goodness, whatever connection we still have to the divine allows us to in some way keep it and grow it. But we don't just have it ex nihilo the way certain people seem to think we do. Human nature is essentially quite greedy. And so then I see politicians, and these are people who are acting on greed, lust, ambition for power, pride, all these things. They are not only acting on, but encouraged to act on. And so, they're encouraged by greed, both by the thought of their government rendered salaries and by the thought of and by lobbyists and donations. They are encouraged by lust in many cases, both of the sexual kind and of the kind and more of the power-hungry kind. They are encouraged by pride, the idea that I can make a change in the world. If only it was I who stood at the helm. They are encouraged by wrath to stir, and they encourage wrath in stirring up fervor against their opponents. I don't know if they're encouraged entirely by sloth, but then you can look at the ones who spend all their time, the people who have been in Congress for the last 6 millennia and nobody knows who elected them in the first place, and go, yeah, there's probably an element of sloth in there. Envy shows up quite often, and they often encourage envy in others. It's like, you see what your neighbor has? Well, if you vote for me, I'll take it from him and give it to you. To be a politician is in many ways to be a living embodiment of the 7 deadly sins. At least prostitutes are only preying on one of them. Politicians prey on all 7, and so to expect integrity from any of them, even the ones who appear to have it, is just insane in my view. And it breeds this sort of cancerous, well, you didn't vote for my preferred politician, so now you're evil. It's like, no, not really. Not really at all. All the politicians are evil. All of them can go die for my money. None of them are worth the skin suits that they walk around in. So yeah, politicians are corrupt, and the business of politics corrupts the populace of a nation. So you go, okay, well, all the politicians are corrupt, and it doesn't much matter one way or the other who you vote for. So how do you make a meaningful change? And you make a meaningful change by building community, by reaching out to your neighbors, by volunteering at the local charity, by attending church, by you make a change by your own participation in acts of good, and not only in physical acts of good, but in acts of good of the will and of the mind and of the heart. You make a change, you make meaningful change through charity, through humility, through generosity. Those are how you make meaningful changes in the world. You don't make a meaningful change by screaming at somebody for having dared vote in a different manner than you. You don't make a meaningful change. Well, maybe you do make a meaningful change that way. You encourage that person to vote against you again. But you don't bring people around to your side by calling them evil for disagreement with you. Change occurs when you can bring about positive change in the culture. And positive change can only be brought about in the culture by means of personal acts of good. And that's hard. That's incredibly hard. That's so hard that most people aren't ever going to even consider it. It's asking people to get up, pick up and bear your own cross. And nobody wants to do that. Hell, I don't want to do that, and I'm here preaching about it. So if you want to change the world, first of all, change yourself. I'm in the process of trying to change myself to better embody those ideals that I hold dear. But go out, change first. Start by cleaning your room. Then once that's put in order, put something else in order. Put your life in order. Figure that out. Then help your neighbor with his life, and build up from there. And in the end, you'll have changed the world. Bye.